The end. Wait, that sounds familiar. Oh yeah, I already did that. So in my last video, I talked about the reasons a lot of animated series don't get a proper ending. It's my first video, so it's not hard to find if you want to watch it. But I realized, after posting it, I forgot one crucial piece of information. How do you end a show? Now, obviously there's no one ending fits all solution, but there are elements that all shows can use, depending on the type of story being told. There are overall two types of story structures used for a show. They are serial and episodic. Serial shows have an overarching narrative. Each episode continues to stack onto events from prior episodes, building on each other in order to form one full cohesive story from beginning to end. Now, at first glance, this might sound like any other normal story, and, well, it is. But because of how television works, you're probably not gonna be watching all the episodes playing back to back. And instead, you'll watch a random episode from one series, followed by a random episode from another series. And if it's your first time watching the show, this might be confusing. Now, before the internet made it easier to catch up on old episodes, TV would use strategies like having recaps at the beginning of each episode, to tell the audience what happened before. And in order to make sure people didn't miss the newer episodes, they would try to release them on a consistent schedule, playing the new episodes on the same day and sometimes the same time every week. Or they would just marathon the show and actually play the episodes back to back from beginning to the latest episode. Now, all these strategies helped, but it was also useful to have shows where you could watch the episodes in any order and still enjoy it. And that is why I think episodic shows were created. Episodic shows are self-contained stories where the events of prior episodes have little to no effect on the episodes that follow it. The only thing that carries over is the characters or just the setting. A vast majority of animated series in the West lean more towards episodic. The characters can go through crazy, outlandish adventures without having to keep much of a consistent plot. They can go through events that could leave them severely injured or worse, only for them to be perfectly fine in the episodes that come after, with no mention of things that happened to them in the previous episodes. Side note, I once heard the reason for the overwhelming amount of episodic series is because companies think children have low attention spans and won't sit down and indulge in a serial story. Actually, this is what I've been hearing media claim for all audiences as of late, that everyone's attention spans are just getting smaller and smaller. Which is, I know kids and some adults who have a hard time sitting still or listening, but that's because they don't want to, not that they can't. If it's something they want to do or watch, most can pay attention no problem. Even if they're procrastinating by doing something else at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not interested. I know that at least 5 million people agree with me that watching an hour-long video about how the internet turned Garfield into something akin to an eldritch horror is a reasonable way to spend their time. It's true that TikTok short video format is doing well, but I think it's more that these short-form videos have to do less to be entertaining. I'm not saying all shorter videos are doing less work. It's more like they don't have to work as hard for a consistent long period. It's like the difference between someone writing and telling one killer joke and another person creating and performing a whole comedy special. When something is longer, it has a higher chance of losing people's interest over time. Not just because of short attention spans, but because keeping something at a consistent quality gets harder to maintain the longer you have to do it. So rather than saying attention spans have lowered, I would say instead that it might be more accurate that the quality of a lot of mainstream media has possibly decreased. But that's just my theory. Anyway, back to the main topic. There are plenty of shows that have elements of both storytelling styles. Rather than them being two separate categories where you need to choose one or the other, it's more like a sliding scale of how much you want of certain elements in your show. Overall though, these two styles do have a lot of opposites. Character development being one of them. As people go through life, they naturally grow and change, sometimes for the better,
Fire Lord Zuko!
and sometimes for worse. So it shouldn't be all that surprising to think that people would write fictional characters to do the same. That's not to say that this change is immediate. Change can take time after all. This is generally the case for serial stories, but for pure episodic shows, things are different. As these characters have no memories of past events and don't receive any consequences for their past mistakes, beyond whatever is happening in that episode, they are much more likely to make the same mistakes over and over again. These would be something like a consistent character flaw. Now, if the characters have strong personalities that the audience likes, then this might not become a problem. One of the big things with episodic series is that people can get bored of the same thing happening over and over again. So writers need to do their best to think of creative situations for these characters that put them in positions where the audience can't always immediately tell what they will do next. Another difference occurs when the characters have a specific goal that they want to accomplish. In a serial story, the characters might slowly work over time in each episode until they eventually reach their goal. While in pure episodic series, what happens usually is that the characters never reach their goal. Heck, the whole plot of a series could be about the different ways they try to achieve this goal. They can get pretty close, but they usually fall short and have to restart from the beginning. Although, this also depends on how large a goal the characters have, and how difficult it is to achieve it. 3 kids occasionally making enough money to buy candy? Not impossible. As opposed to 2 mice who,
Jimmy, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
The Pinky and the Brain.
To summarize, what sets these 2 story styles apart is how much is brought along to new episodes from the things that happened in old episodes. Well, now that we've established the 2 types, let's actually talk about how to end them. Let's start with serial shows. Now again, there's no one ending fits all solution, but there are elements that can lead you in the right direction. In the simplest terms, if there are any questions that need to be answered, you answer them. And if there are any problems, you solve them. Now, what these questions or problems are depends on the story. But one clue I have found to find these questions is by knowing what the genre of the story is. If it's a romance, then the foreseeable ending could be the conclusion of the romantic tension. This could mean the couple finally ends up together, or maybe not. That's up to the story and the writer. Regardless, answering the question of will they, won't they is one possible conclusion to the story. Let's try some different genres: action and adventure. Now, while these are technically 2 genres, they basically have a lot of the same questions, starting with, why is this happening? Whatever goal the character has for fighting or going on their quest/journey, if they have neither anymore, then that seems like it would be a good place to stop. After Samurai Jack finally returned to the past and defeated Haku, the reason for his journey and the reason he was even fighting were both gone. If the character has no more enemies to fight, if they accomplish whatever reason they were on the adventure, or even more radical, if the character dies, then the reason we are following the story in the first place would be gone. Unless, of course, new enemies show up, or the characters find something else exciting to do, or if somehow the character comes back to life, then of course you can continue. It's not odd for a show to switch to a different main villain after they defeat the previous one. Castlevania, Kipo and the Age of the Wonder Beast, and to add one non-Netflix property example, Jackie Chan Animated Adventures, they all did this. In these cases, this was the end of one arc instead of the whole series. Most genres have questions that need to be answered in one shape or fashion. Heck, the mystery genre as a concept is set up by questions that need to be answered. I mentioned another possible endpoint briefly before. If a character has a personal goal, then letting them accomplish it, or even them getting to a place where completing the goal is no longer possible, is definitely a place where you can just roll the credits. If a character's motivations are fulfilled, and the questions have been answered, that seems like at least a potential stopping point. As long as it's not outright canceled, serial stories always have a theoretical end. Although episodic series don't have this guarantee. When I've expressed my opinion on this, I've had friends disagree, saying that episodic series, being as they are, can't have satisfying endings. And I do see their point. After all, if a series has no overall goal or consistent plot, how does one actually end it? Most episodic series I've seen are comedies, with the only real goal of each episode is to make the audience laugh. And what usually happens in the end is the writers run out of ideas, the audience gets bored of the show, and it gets canceled. Or in a few cases, it never ends. Basically, for most episodic series, there are only two real paths, and both options suck. But I still think there are a couple ways to properly end an episodic series. While a lot of them might be comedies, that doesn't necessarily mean that is the only genre it falls under. And with multiple genres brings multiple opportunities to introduce subplots into a story. Subplots are storylines that run parallel to the main narrative. They are basically side stories that don't do much to move the main plot forward. Subplots are distinguished from the main plot by taking up less of the action. It could take place over a few episodes, it could just be one episode, or even a small recurring element in multiple episodes. A lot of progression could happen behind the scenes, and we might check back on it every once in a while to see what is new or what has changed. I heard multiple times when Steven Universe was airing, people incorrectly referring to a lot of the subplots where Steven hung out with the people in Beach City as filler. The point of a subplot is to show things we wouldn't normally be able to see during the main plot. Like seeing a different side of a main character. It can give them a chance to rest, reflect, and deal with things that might be personal for them but aren't important to the main plot. Subplots also give us a chance to learn more about the side characters and the world itself. In the case of Steven Universe, well, this clip says it all.
We just wanted Steven to have some fun. I don't know what's going on with aliens trying to abduct him and him being his own mom, but it sounds like he's got a lot on his mind.
I'm sure whatever you're having him do is important, but everyone needs a break once in a while.
He's just a kid.
If young Steven had to constantly deal with gem war issues all the time, 24/7, then the events of Future would have happened a lot sooner and probably would have gone a lot worse. These times, while not always calm, gave Steven the break he needed and also gave him time to reflect and sometimes let out feelings that he was initially afraid to show his gem family. Another good example comes from around the end of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Team Avatar goes to see a play produced by the Ember Island players. This works not only as a creative recap, but also shows the events through the lens of the people of the Fire Nation, and was a great display of Fire Nation propaganda. We also got to look over things that were bothering certain members. Zuko's feelings of regret from betraying his uncle, and the current state of Aang and Katara's romantic relationship. While these are not integral to the main plot, they do add more layers to the characters and the world. So why am I telling you all this? Well, subplots allow you to create threads that are not crucial to the main narrative at first. This is my proposal. If your show has a subplot, then bringing that subplot to the forefront as part of the main story in order to conclude the subplot is one way to end a show. For example, Regular Show. It stayed mostly episodic, but multiple seasons ended by closing off subplots. Mordecai's love life, Rigby trying to get his high school degree, Muscle Man getting married, Pops' destiny. These storylines only made up a part of the seasons they were included in. Now, you might notice that I keep mentioning main plots, but episodic shows don't generally have main plots, right? This leads to my next proposal. You can just give an episodic series more serial elements. I've already said that this is a sliding scale. There are shows that I've seen that start off as episodic that became serial over time. As the world is explored and the characters begin to develop, things that seem to be just random might turn out to have a reason or logic we just didn't understand yet. Steven Universe initially felt like random one-off episodes until they started to show a more consistent plot. If you start to introduce elements that persist as a looming thread throughout one or multiple seasons that lead to maybe one of the genre questions from before, and then eventually answer these questions, basically, if you turn it more serial, you can end it in a more serial way. If that makes sense. Now, what if you don't want to make a show more serial? What if you want to keep the series purely episodic? What then? Well, those series are much more likely to just end abruptly from getting canceled, but if that's how you want to go out, then I say let's go out with a bang. I propose doing a movie finale. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a movie. What I mean is let the characters go out on one big final adventure. Now, this big adventure can be anything, but here's some interesting options that I've seen used. Since episodic series essentially reset after each episode, you can have something happen that changes the status quo in a potentially permanent way. And the main characters either work to keep things the way they were before, or try to shift it in a way that's at least more satisfying for them. You could also answer a question that, while not entirely important to the story, the audience did have some level of curiosity about. Ed, Edd n Eddy had a movie finale that actually did both of these things. The trio do a scam that goes so disastrous that they actually get chased out of town, and they have to figure out where to go next. So they decide to try to find and go live with Eddie's older brother, a person mentioned multiple times by Eddie, and we've seen remnants of his existence and its impact in the show, but we've never actually seen him up to this point. It's way more tense than I would expect from Ed, Edd n Eddy, and it has a kind of satisfying happy ending. I think more shows should have big finales like this. Some feel like they tried, but it didn't turn out that way. You know what? I'm just gonna say it. SpongeBob should have ended after its first movie. It feels like the conclusion of the story to me. Again, these endings don't have to be full movies. Overall, you just need to let the characters that the audience has fallen in love with show off their best one last time. In Jimmy Neutron, their final episode was having him deal with multiple of his past villains who joined together just to take him down. And then there's Kim Possible. They had to deal with the terror of an unknown future facing them as they were graduating high school and walking down the path to adulthood. Also, there was a large-scale alien invasion. Actually, Kim Possible originally ended with the movie. But in one of the few examples of fan outcry working, they actually got another season. Wow, they stuck the landing twice. Remember though, everything is on a sliding scale, and most shows are not fully serial or episodic. So while I introduce these ideas in specific sections, they are not restricted to only working in one type of story structure. Of course, all these ideas are well and good, but being able to accomplish them is another thing altogether, especially with higher up interference being inevitable sometimes. And with streaming, it's already an accomplishment to get 2 seasons of a show. There aren't many ways to combat this, but there are still ways to end things on a somewhat satisfying note. Like, you can write each season as if it's the only season you get. Each season being its own full arc. Infinity Train, Over the Garden Wall, Total Drama Island, they all fit under this umbrella. It's not always ideal, but at the very least, it's better than not being able to tell your story. If you know you can get past having more than one season, then you should keep in mind at least an idea of how the story will end. As the series goes, you can change things here and there, but at least have an idea of how it will go. Honestly, I wish things were different, but they aren't. Regardless, there is a way to end every story, and having many ways to think up ideas is good. Like most things on the internet, this is just one of many sources, so take all of this with a grain of salt, let it sink in a little, and come to your own conclusions. Even if you don't think that any of these ideas are how you wish to end your story, that's still good, because at the very least you found out ways that you don't want to do it. I'll be honest, I pretty much talked out of my donkey this whole video. I actually did almost no research because I did so much research on the last one, and these ideas had been floating in my head for a while now. So I knew what I wanted to say more or less already. But of course, if you think I gave any misinformation, just leave it in the comments. These videos are more about making you think and talk than me being right. Thank you for watching. Why don't you tell me some of your favorite cartoon endings down in the comments? Okay, bye!